Hello, everybody, and I am absolutely delighted to be able to talk to you today about cognitive science in the physics classroom, something that I have been looking at very closely and carefully for a number of years now. Super interesting, super exciting, and particularly relevant to physics, I think. So you will know from the information about the talk that this is what we will be looking at. So I won't read through, but just to refresh your memory about that. And these are the three things that I will be doing. So I will pause and let you look through those. So you'll see that we're looking at what it is, why we should bother with it, why it's important, and how to apply that in the physics classroom. And I'm doing things that I've done myself. So this is not advocating for anything that I have not actually done. So let's start with the what. So this is a graphic which illustrates the way that we think about learning and memory. Things I'm sure that you are aware of, that we have a working memory. It's limited. Humans have about the same size. You can't do much about it. It is that size. Long-term memory is huge. Cognitive scientists like to say infinite, which makes me balk a little, but it's pretty big. As big as we haven't reached limits. Learning involves moving things into the long-term memory from the working memory, and retrieval means remembering stuff, means bringing it back out. You forget stuff, but it's about attention. What you attend to is what you learn. So this is from this book. So there'll be various books. I put links at the end of this presentation to all the books. This is fabulous. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend it. It was one of the first books I read about cognitive science, and super interesting. Danny William is great. If you can read the quote. And this is from Dylan William, who, if you remember the ideas about formative assessment, he wrote a paper with Paul Black back, I think, in 1988 about formative assessment called Inside the Black Box. And I think this is just really interesting to have in the back of one's mind, that otherwise it's kind of like a fishing expedition if we don't know how learning works. So number 2 is schema building. EFRAP first, again, link at the end, produced this phenomenally useful graphic about our movement from a novice to an expert schema. So we are in the schema building business. And a novice doesn't have much in terms of the nodes, the concepts, or the connections between them. But by explanation and practice, we develop a mastery of that so that we move along the novice to expert continuum. So this has proved a very useful way of thinking about it. But I'm going to pause and now just talk about this, because sometimes when I talk to people about long-term memory, they have concerns, and I'd like to allay those concerns now. So I think it's really important to appreciate that the move, I mean, you can tell I'm from the UK. So when I started teaching, it was very traditional methods, and we moved then to the other end of the spectrum to discovery learning, inquiry learning, project learning, all sorts of other things where you didn't tell kids, they found things out for themselves. We've moved into another realm now where we're talking about using cognitive science, direct instruction, long-term memory, and so on. I don't see this as a regression to sort of the days of lecturing and rote learning. It's certainly not that. I think the most important thing is the thing in red. And I am mindful that actually my ability to solve problems is directly related to what I already know. And there's so much research on this. They've done research on physicists, and that was one of the most significant papers that was published about this, that sort of kicked a lot of it off, was to do with physics people. So it is easier to do stuff that you've seen before, that you know, and that you understand. And we are experts, and we cannot remove the possibility of our students becoming like us just because we think it's fun for them to do projects and find it out for themselves. It's my view. So number 3. So when you use your attention to look at things, we're then organizing things so that we can integrate it into long-term memory, build our schema, okay, schema building. So this is the SOI model from Führer and Mayer. This is quite a big book and it's quite expensive. This is a shorter book and it's much cheaper. And it's brilliant. It's got loads and loads of different ideas for the classroom, fabulously practical and spot on. All of the references are at the end. Number 4. Now, Daniel Willing recently, or fairly recently, said that the one thing that teachers should know about cognitive science is this, cognitive load theory. And I would be inclined to agree, because it actually, it's annoying because it changes how you do what you do, because you know it and you can't unknow it. So let me pause and let you have a look if you haven't already read it. So your entirety, the bar graphs are great, separate presentation on bar graphs, but you have how hard it is and the amount of, when you say cognitive load, you mean working memory space. So working memory space that it takes up to deal with this, well, it just does, because it's that thing that you're talking about. You're talking about, kinetic energy, and that just is like that. Germane load is, well, we're going to talk about dropping balls and videoing them and so on, and that will have a certain amount of load attached to that. You will video it. That is the germane load attached to the learning, which we are again in control of. And then you have all the other stuff. So you could have like people dropping eggs off tower blocks and things. That's extraneous. And that's been the one thing that I've had to go back and really think about. Where do I put this, all these video clips and everything else? Because they are extraneous. They're taking up space in people's working memory. So you'll see, actually, there's a series of these books. This is also excellent by Ollie Lovell, who spoke to John Sweller. So John Sweller was the originator of this idea of cognitive load. Fabulous book. Finally, dual coding. You may have noticed already that I have been pausing. Okay, so I'm pausing because there are the way of thinking about this is that there are 2 channels by which information can be attended to and processed, and that is verbal and visual. And when I pause, it's because, and you know this from people reading out PowerPoint presentations, that it's really hard to read and to have someone read it to you at the same time, because they're both trying to come in through the same channel. It's very ineffective and actually can be less counterproductive. However, you can have visual things coming in by a visual stimulus, by the visual channel, at the same time as the verbal, and this is about integration of them. It is not about slapping logos on things, and I mean sometimes you can, and it's kind of useful to trigger memories and stuff, but this is about, if you have words coming in from the verbal side by whatever, orally or written, and images via the visual channel, then you are able to deal with twice as much stuff, basically, which means that it helps you to encode faster. Is your infinite long-term memory there, and then that will make it easier to retrieve, because when you've built a schema, your schema then includes images as well as words. So this is health warning. This is not learning styles. Learning styles have been disproved, debunked. There are no such things. There are no pyramids, are not things either. So let's just get those out of the way. And so there is no book about that, but I put the link to, this is Oliver Caviglione's forte, and I put the link to his website at the end. So what are we going to do? We're going to discuss the principles of cognitive science, and there are 5. There they are. I think schema is crazy important as a word to have students know. Next, we'll talk about the research evidence for the strategies that go alongside or are underpinned by these ideas, principles of cognitive science. So number one on absolutely every list of strategies is retrieval practice. So let me pause, because you now know that you need to use your verbal channel. So hopefully it's clear, well, possibly, I don't know, clear from the other discussions about why retrieval practice is important, but maybe not. I mean, the testing effect was kind of interesting when it was first discovered, when they first started to actually try and measure some stuff to do with it, that it did have such a profound effect. Obviously, we don't say testing because testing has a negative connotation for most students. But the interesting thing that I read recently is number 3 there. At first, because when I read this, this person said, well, actually what we did is we gave them the test questions at the beginning. Like, no way, why would you do that? Now, I would put a caveat on this because I don't think it was actually in physics, and I have yet to try this myself. So, but I might try it with the caveat that having explained it to the students that we're trying this out. But I actually think it has some, there is some weight to this in the sense that what you're doing is you're accessing the schema that you already have. So what you're doing is you're activating that area, priming in psychological terms, your brain to get ready for this information that's going to link to these things you've already thought about because of the question, that even if you weren't sure of the answer or even didn't know the answer, you kind of looked around for it. So I thought that was a really super interesting thing. Number 2, there is quite considerable evidence for interleaving. That means not teaching the whole of it. So not teaching the whole of forces as one complete block, but you chunk it up and you do some of it, and then you go on to electricity, and then you go back to forces and so on. Now, when I first read this, I thought that's just bonkers, because why would you, like, you would just not go into things and they wouldn't get it. It wouldn't like sit so deeply in terms of their understanding. But actually, if you think about the schema building, what we're trying to do is build schema that are robust. So it's not about whether they just remember it at the end of your lesson. It's whether they remember it 3 weeks from now, and whether they can link it to this thing that someone happens to say to them, like in the car on the way somewhere. And that's the important thing. And the only way you get good at doing that is by doing that. And so I've tried this, and all of my reservations have gone out the window because it's great. It really works. They don't bat an eyelid because you explain what you're doing. It also interrupts the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is, I think you may have seen before, but basically you'll have forgotten most stuff fairly quickly. It's only over a few days. So you need to refresh it. You need to, and the way you do that is pull it out of your long-term memory. So number 3, zooming in and zooming out. So this speaks to the structure part, or the structuring part of the SOI model. So you select, you organize, and you integrate. So to help you organize, you need a structure. And really, that's the really big picture thing for students to understand how to put these ideas together. And the thing is, because we're physicists, we already have it and it's integrated and it's good already. We don't think about it. So my schema for physics is pretty well developed and robust. My schema for the politics of the Middle East is considerably less so. I know pretty much nothing, or very, very little, and I couldn't put it together. I have isolated facts. I'd need someone to give me a structure to put those ideas together and learn that. Dual coding. So as there's nothing much more that I haven't already said about that, but it does considerably reduce cognitive load. So we've looked at the strategies for which there is research evidence. There are 4. They are there. And let's now look at how that works in practice. This is what I do. So I do tons and tons and tons of low stakes quizzes. They just don't really count, but you kind of count grading. Let's not go there. They know the answer straight away. They get used to making mistakes. This is a very, it links to this display. I will let you look at that and read that comment from a student. So the culture of like making mistakes and not getting it right first time, super important, and something that you can do explicitly, and it helps to have something like that on the wall you can point to. Okay, graphic organizers. This is the graphic organizer for physics, high school physics, and it's the zoom in, zoom out. So this is actually going to be in a book, yay, published in September, link at the end. You can zoom in and zoom out. I mean, it's super interesting to think what, this is mine, you know, what does Richard Feynman's look like? What does Cara Ravelli's look like? So you can introduce this and make this bigger. It's going to be a wall display. So but very, very useful for the students to see what their learning fits into everything else. This is an example of dual coding. Have a look at the diagram. So I use this model with 8th grade and high school and AP1 and APC. It's useful for everybody. That's what I mean. Take it out of the text and put it into the diagram. And the most important, well, not this, one of the important things is that I've deliberately thought about where I put the other stuff because it's really important for students to see everything else. If you look at my other what is physics for, you'll see the hinterland. It is important. I do not dispute that for a second, but it's a judicious decision about where to put it in, because what is this for, this activity that we're doing? Is it for learning this, etc.? So we have looked at the strategies. They are those. I may have missed the slop. Slop is just shed loads of practice, lots of space practice. But the most important thing, I keep saying most important, another really important thing is that you explain what it is that you're doing. If you're going to go down this road, and they're up for it. It is really super interesting how interested they are and how they then apply your strategies to other subjects. So I tell them what we're going to do. And then as we're doing it, when I introduce something or we look at the plan of map of the terrain or something, I say, remember, this is zooming out. So we have a way of talking about it. So this is an example of a slide that I show them at the beginning. Obviously, I give them lots of time to read it. I mentioned attention, short-term memory, long-term memory a lot. So I just thought I'd end with this question from my information about the talk, just to see if we can work it out now, given what we know. So why is PD so difficult? Well, I couldn't understand this. The definition of PD, or voltage, as energy per charge, I could not figure out why no one remembered that for years, 30 odd years. Why is that so hard? It's because of this. You have an abstract thing to start with for which they have no concept. So you have to install that concept. Then you have to install the other abstract concept called energy. Then you have to link the two together for a further abstract concept called potential difference or voltage. That is, in schema terms, like treble the load of most things they're doing, at least most things. When you say, momentum, somebody's got an idea of momentum in terms of sports teams or something. They have something in here already, but this, no. So that is why. So I hope that has been useful. I hope there's some ideas that you can have a look at integrating into your classroom. Oh, I should say it takes a lot of work for them to integrate these kind of things. I have produced a whole list of resources linked to everything that I've talked about in this presentation. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.